Last transmission from Earth, Part 1. The station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between three dying stars. Its walls were made of crystal that sang when light touched them. For 60,000 years, the Dominion had ruled from this place. 12 species bowed to them. 100 worlds paid tribute. They had never met anything they could not control. Today, they met humanity. Director stood in the great chamber and tried not to show her fear. She was 63 years old. Her hair was gray. Her hands were steady. Behind her stood 12 other humans, all dressed in simple white clothes. They carried no weapons. Their ship, waiting in the docking bay, had no guns. They had come across 400 light-years of empty space with nothing but words. The high adjudicators looked down at them from their floating thrones. They were tall beings, almost 3 meters high, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with cold blue fire. Their leader, Supreme Adjudicator Al, leaned forward with something that might have been amusement. "You are the humans," he said. His voice echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. "We have watched your species for some time. You spread slowly. You build small ships. You fight among yourselves with primitive weapons." He paused. "Why have you come to us?" Bowed her head slightly. "We come seeking friendship, trade, cultural exchange. We wish to learn from the great species of the Dominion." Al made a sound that might have been laughter. The other adjudicators joined him. The sound filled the crystal chamber and made the walls ring. "Friendship," Al repeated. "How touching. Tell me, human, where are your warships? Where are your weapons? Every species that achieves star travel develops military power. It is the natural way of things. Yet your ships are naked. Your worlds are undefended. Are you truly so foolish, or is this some kind of trick?" Had prepared for this question. She had practiced her answer 1,000 times on the long journey to Nexus Prime. "We were not always peaceful," she said carefully. 300 years ago, our species stood at a crossroads. We had developed weapons of terrible power. We looked at what we had created and we were afraid. Afraid of what? Ourselves, met the Supreme Adjudicator's glowing eyes. We chose to step back from the edge. We dismantled our weapons. We sealed away the knowledge of how to build them. We taught our children that cooperation was better than conquest. It was not easy, but we believed it was right. Al studied her for a long moment. Then he waved one long-fingered hand dismissively. "How noble, how very soft." He turned to his fellow adjudicators. "The humans will make acceptable tributaries. They are weak, but they seem eager to please. We will allow them limited trade access. They will pay the standard tribute in resources. They will host our observers on their worlds." He looked back at, "These are our terms. You will accept them." It was not a question. Felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had hoped for more. She had hoped that perhaps, after 60,000 years, the Dominion might have grown beyond simple domination. But some things, it seemed, did not change. "We accept," she said quietly. The journey home took 3 months, spent most of it staring out at the stars and wondering if she had made the right choice. Her assistant, a young man named David Park, found her in the observation deck one night. "You did what you had to do," he said. "We're not ready for a war." "I know," pressed her hand against the cold glass, "but I keep thinking about what we left behind, the archives, the sealed vaults, everything our ancestors decided to forget." David was quiet for a moment. "Do you think we'll ever need them, those things we buried?" "I pray we won't," turned away from the stars. "Every day, David, I pray we won't." Far away, on Earth's moon, an old woman named Dr. Sarah sat in a small office surrounded by screens and ancient books. She was 87 years old, one of the few remaining keepers of a secret that most of humanity had forgotten existed. Beneath her feet, deep below the gray lunar dust, lay the largest vault ever constructed. Its doors were 3 meters thick, made of alloys that would take a nuclear blast to scratch. Inside were servers containing every piece of military knowledge humanity had ever created. Weapon designs, strategy manuals, the complete history of every war ever fought, and other things, darker things. Theoretical weapons that had never been built because the scientists who designed them had been too horrified by their own creations. Sarah watched the news feed showing directors meeting with the. She saw the alien leaders laughing. She saw bow her head in acceptance. "They're making first contact today," Sarah whispered to the empty room. "God help them if it goes wrong." She had been a young woman when she first learned about the vaults. Her grandmother had been one of the scientists who sealed them. She remembered the old woman's words, spoken in a voice heavy with memory and regret. "We didn't bury those things because we were weak, Sarah. We buried them because we were too strong, because we looked at what human beings could do when they really tried, and we were terrified. The math was perfect. The physics was sound. The weapons would have worked. That was the problem. They would have worked too well." Sarah understood now, in a way she hadn't as a young woman. Humanity had not become peaceful because they lacked the ability to fight. They had become peaceful because they had seen the end of the road. They had glimpsed the final weapons, the ultimate strategies, the last wars, and they had chosen to turn away. But the choice could be undone. The vaults could be opened. The knowledge was still there, waiting in the darkness below the lunar surface. Sarah hoped, with every fiber of her being, that it would never be needed. She watched the news feed until it ended. Then she turned off the screens and sat alone in the darkness, thinking about humanity's past and fearing for its future. Above her, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small concerns of mortal beings. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was already making plans for their tributaries. They saw humanity as just another weak species to be absorbed and exploited. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Not yet. Last transmission from Earth, Part 2. 22 years passed. Doctor had been a young student when the first came. Now he was 45 years old, with gray in his hair and anger in his heart. He worked as a studying alien cultures. But his real job, the one he never spoke about, was documenting what the Dominion was doing to humanity. He kept records. He gathered testimony. He wrote everything down in coded files that he hid in a dozen different places. The Dominion did not conquer with armies. They conquered with rules, with taxes, with small humiliations that piled up year after year until a people forgot what freedom felt like. Human ships could no longer travel freely between stars. They needed permits. The permits were expensive and hard to get. Human colonies paid 60% of their resources to the Dominion as tribute. Observers lived on every human world, watching everything, reporting everything. But the worst part was what they did to human culture. Stood in a classroom on the colony world of New Geneva, and watched a cultural advisor teach human children about their own history. "Your species was violent," the advisor said. His name was Han, and he spoke with the patient tone of someone explaining obvious facts to slow learners. "For thousands of years, you killed each other. You fought wars over land, over resources, over ideas. This proves that humans are inherently barbaric. You required the guidance of the Dominion to become civilized." A young girl raised her hand. "But my grandmother says we chose to become peaceful. She says we decided." "Your grandmother is mistaken," Han interrupted. "Humans did not choose peace. Humans are incapable of such wisdom. You were simply too primitive to develop proper weapons before we found you. The Dominion brought peace to your species. You should be grateful." Watch the children nod and take notes. They were too young to remember a time before the Dominion. They believed what they were told. He left the classroom before he did something he would regret. That night received a message from his sister on the colony world of Meridian's Hope. The Dominion had declared the planet a resource priority zone. All human residents were being relocated to make room for mining operations. "They're giving us 30 days, his sister wrote. 30 days to leave our homes, our farms, Everything we've built for 3 generations. Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? Did not have an answer. 2 weeks later, the colony ship carrying Meridian's Hope's population requested an extension. They needed more time to organize the evacuation. There were elderly people who could not be moved quickly. There were children who needed medical care. The Dominion flagship Eternal Judgment responded by firing on the planet's surface. Learned about it from a news feed. He was eating breakfast when the report came in. 40,000 dead. The entire colonial capital gone in minutes. The Dominion called it a necessary correction to punish resistance to lawful authority. His sister was among the dead. Sat alone in his apartment for 3 days. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He just sat and stared at the wall and thought about 40,000 people who had done nothing wrong except ask for more time. On the 4th day, he received a message from Earth. The Unified Council was meeting in emergency session. His expertise was needed. They did not say why. He arrived at the council chambers in Geneva to find them full of people he recognized. Scientists, military historians, archaeologists, people who studied the old days, the time before the severance, the time humanity had tried so hard to forget. Director stood at the center of the room. She was 85 now, frail and thin, but her eyes still burned with the same fire had seen in old recordings of her first meeting with the 22 years ago, she said, her voice still strong despite her age. I stood before the Dominion and promised peace. I believed that if we showed them our best selves, they would learn to respect us. She paused. I was wrong. The room was silent. They have taken our dignity. They have stolen our resources. They have rewritten our history to make us believe we were always weak. Her hands trembled slightly. And now they have killed 40,000 of our people because they asked for 30 more days. She looked around the room at all the faces watching her. I am calling for a vote. The motion before this council is Protocol Prometheus. A murmur ran through the crowd. We will unseal the lunar archives. We will remember what we chose to forget, and we will decide together what to do with that knowledge. The vote was unanimous. On the moon, Dr. Sarah received the authorization code. She was over 100 years old now, kept alive by medical technology that would have seemed like magic to her ancestors. Her hands shook as she entered the sequence that would open the vault doors. The doors had not moved in 312 years. The mechanisms protested. The ancient seals cracked, but slowly, impossibly, the massive barriers began to slide apart. Sarah walked into the vault. The lights came on automatically, revealing rows and rows of servers carefully preserved in climate-controlled chambers. Screens flickered to life, showing menus of files organized by category. Weapons, strategies, histories, and a special section marked in red labeled simply, Theoretical, Never Build. Sarah looked at the files her ancestors had sealed away. She thought about the children being taught to hate their own nature. She thought about the colonies being stripped of resources. She thought about Meridian's Hope burning. Forgive us, she whispered to no one. We tried so hard to forget. Then she began the process of unlocking the files and transmitting them to Earth. The knowledge that humanity had buried was rising from its grave. The Dominion had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that humanity's peaceful nature was weakness. They had believed that a species without visible weapons was a species without the ability to fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Last transmission from Earth, Part 3. Sat in a room deep beneath the Swiss Alps and read the files his ancestors had sealed away. He was part of the Remembrance Committee, a group of scholars tasked with understanding what humanity had buried 3 centuries ago. He had expected weapons. He had expected history. He had not expected to feel sick with fear. The files were organized by era. The early ones were familiar enough: projectile weapons, explosives, chemical agents. These were the tools of ancient wars, terrible but understandable. Then came the nuclear age, then the biological weapons, then the era of artificial intelligence and autonomous killing machines. But it was the final section that made close his eyes and breathe deeply. Theoretical weapons, designs that had never been built, mathematics that described ways to tear holes in the fabric of space itself, devices that could cause stars to go supernova, systems that could rewrite the quantum structure of matter at a distance, weapons so terrible that the scientists who created them had immediately classified everything and recommended that the research never continue. Read the notes left by those long-dead scientists. One passage stayed with him. "We have solved the equations. The weapons would work. That is precisely the problem. We have created something that could end not just a war, but all wars, by ending everything. We recommend immediate classification and permanent burial of this research. Some knowledge is too dangerous to exist." That had been the beginning of the severance. Humanity had looked at what it could become, and it had chosen to step back. Understood now why his ancestors had made that choice, but he also understood something else. They had not destroyed the knowledge. They had preserved it just in case. Just in case something like that came along. Across human space, the unsealing continued. Shipyards that had built nothing but cargo vessels for 3 centuries received new blueprints. Engineers who had never designed a weapon in their lives opened files and felt something strange stir in their minds. Doctor was one of those engineers. She worked at the main orbital shipyard above Earth, and she had spent her career building transport ships and space stations. Now she stared at designs for something called a phase disruptor array and felt tears running down her face. She understood the physics immediately. It was as if the knowledge had always been there, waiting in some deep part of her brain. The designs were elegant, efficient, and absolutely devastating. A single ship equipped with this technology could disable a fleet without killing anyone, or could destroy a planet if the settings were changed. How did they know this? She asked the empty room. How did they figure this out 300 years ago? The answer was simple, she realized. Humanity had always known. Every species carried the seeds of its own destruction. Most species needed time to develop those seeds into weapons, but humans had done it quickly, too quickly, and then they had done something no other species had ever done. They had chosen to stop. Wiped her eyes and got to work. The observers noticed increased activity in human space. Their sensors detected new construction projects at every major shipyard. They sent reports back to Nexus Prime, requesting clarification. A Dominion inspection team arrived at the Earth orbital shipyard 2 months after the unsealing. Commander and his team of technical analysts were prepared to find evidence of illegal weapon construction. They were prepared to recommend immediate military intervention. What they found was a shipyard building, what appeared to be standard cargo vessels. "Our sensors show increased energy usage," said to the human manager, a nervous-looking man named James Wright. "Our reports indicate unusual activity." "We're increasing production," James explained. He smiled apologetically. "The Dominion requires more tribute each year. We need more cargo ships to meet our obligations." Walked through the shipyard. His personal scanner detected nothing unusual. The partially completed ships showed no signs of weapon systems. The workers seemed to be building exactly what they claimed to be building. But something felt wrong. Had been an inspector for 200 years. He had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him that these humans were hiding something. "I want to see your construction records," he demanded. James produced the records immediately. They showed nothing unusual. Standard cargo vessels, standard components, standard everything. Could not explain the feeling in his gut. He filed a report expressing his concerns, but without evidence, there was nothing more he could do. He did not know that the cargo vessels he had seen were actually warships. He did not know that every component that looked standard was actually something far more advanced, disguised by technology he could not detect. He did not know that the shipyard's true production numbers were hidden behind firewalls that would take 1,000 years to crack. Humanity had not forgotten how to make weapons. They had also not forgotten how to hide them. Back on Earth, the Council received regular updates on production. In 18 months, the shipyards had produced 30,000 warships, each one equipped with technology that made the Dominion's most advanced vessels look like children's toys. More importantly, they had developed stealth systems so sophisticated that the ships were effectively invisible. They could hang in space right next to a sensor array and never be detected. Looked at the production reports and felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. "We really were that good at this," he said quietly. Director, watching from her wheelchair, nodded slowly. "We always were. That's what they never understood. We didn't stop building weapons because we couldn't. We stopped because we were too good at it." In the shadow of Earth, invisible to every sensor, 3,000 warships hung in the darkness, waiting. And in the shipyards, production continued. 20,000 more. 25,000 more. The Dominion had killed 40,000 humans and called it a necessary correction. They were about to learn what a real correction looked like. Last transmission from Earth, Part 4. The Dominion fleet entered the Sol system like a storm of metal and fire. 800 warships, the largest armada assembled in 10,000 years. Supreme Adjudicator Al himself commanded from the flagship Eternal Judgment. They had come to teach humanity a final lesson. Reports had reached Nexus Prime of human unrest, whispers of resistance, rumors that something was happening in human space that the observers could not explain. Al had decided that a demonstration of overwhelming force would end any thoughts of rebellion before they could grow. He expected to find a terrified species. He expected surrender within hours. He expected to glass a few cities, execute a few leaders, and return home in triumph. What he found instead changed everything. The human message came on all frequencies as the Dominion fleet passed Jupiter. Director's face appeared on every screen, her voice calm and clear despite her age. "We came to you seeking peace," she said. "We dismantled our weapons. We taught our children to be kind. For 22 years we endured your contempt, your theft, your murder of our people. We did this because we knew what we were. We hoped, we prayed, that we would never have to remember." Al laughed. "The old woman is making speeches. How touching. Continue to Earth. We will." Supreme Adjudicator, one of his officers interrupted, his voice strange. "Something is happening." Space itself seemed to ripple. Where there had been empty darkness a moment before, shapes began to appear. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Ships that had been completely invisible to every sensor suddenly revealed themselves. 30,000 warships hung in the space around the Dominion fleet. They were smaller than the vessels, sleeker, more elegant, and they were everywhere. "You killed 40,000 of us on Meridian's Hope," continued. "You thought that made you strong. You thought we were weak because we chose peace." Al stared at the screens showing the human fleet. His officers were shouting numbers, 30,000, 35,000. The count kept rising as more ships, but he barely heard them. This was impossible. Humans did not have warships. Humans could not have built this many ships in any length of time. Humans did not have this technology. "We didn't choose peace because we couldn't wage war," said. "We chose peace because we were too good at it." The first volley was unlike anything Al had ever seen. There were no missiles, no energy beams, just a shimmer in space, like heat waves rising from hot ground, and then 798 Dominion ships went dark. Not destroyed, disabled, every weapon system precisely excised, every engine crippled, life support still functioning, crews still alive, but the ships were now nothing more than floating metal boxes. The attack had taken less than 3 seconds. Al's flagship and one escort vessel were left untouched. He understood immediately. This was not sloppiness. This was a message. "Retreat," he ordered, his voice barely a whisper. "Retreat now." The 2 remaining ships fled. No one tried to stop them. On the human command ship, watched them go. He had been assigned as the human envoy, responsible for delivering humanity's message to the Dominion. He had hoped he would never have to do it. "We could have destroyed them," said quietly. She stood at the weapons console, her hands still shaking slightly. "We could have killed them all." "That's why we didn't," replied. "We need them to understand. We need them to carry the message back." The survivors of the Dominion fleet were allowed to retrieve their crews from the disabled ships. Rescue operations took 3 days. During that time, no human ship fired another shot. Medical supplies were offered. Technical assistance was provided to repair life support systems. The crews could not understand it. They had come to destroy. They had been utterly defeated, and now their enemies were helping them. On the final day, boarded the Eternal Judgment to meet with Supreme Adjudicator Al. The alien leader looked older than remembered from the historical recordings. Smaller. His glowing eyes had dimmed. "What are you?" Al asked. His voice held no anger, only confusion, only fear. "What kind of species defeats an enemy completely and then offers them help?" Sat down across from the Supreme Adjudicator. He thought about his sister, dead on Meridian's Hope. He thought about the children being taught to hate themselves. He thought about 22 years of humiliation. Then he thought about what it meant to be human. "We're what happens when a species of predators tries to become better," he said finally. "The predator never goes away. It just learns patience." Al shook his head slowly. "We have ruled for 60,000 years. We have never encountered anything like you." "No," agreed. "You haven't, and that's why we're letting you go. We need you to tell everyone what you've seen. We need the Dominion to understand what humanity is, not what you thought we were, what we actually are." "And what is that?" Stood up. "We're the species that could have become the worst monsters in the galaxy. The weapons we just used, those are the gentle ones, the ones we built because we didn't want to kill you. You have no idea what we kept sealed away, what we chose never to build." He paused at the door. "Go home, Supreme Adjudicator. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them that humanity is coming to Nexus Prime, not to conquer, to talk." Al said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The 2 Dominion ships limped away toward the edge of the solar system. Behind them, the human fleet remained in formation, watching, waiting. Returned to the command ship and found Director waiting for him. "Do you think they'll listen?" she asked. "I don't know," admitted, "but I know they're scared, and scared people sometimes make better choices." Smiled sadly. "Let's hope so. I've spent my whole life hopping for the best from people. I'd hate to be wrong now." The human fleet began preparations for the journey to Nexus Prime. They would arrive not as conquerors, but as something the galaxy had never seen before. Liberators who wanted nothing, warriors who chose peace, predators who had learned mercy. The Dominion would never be the same. Last transmission from Earth, Part 5. The human fleet arrived at Nexus Prime on a morning that changed history. They came not with weapons blazing, but with cargo holds full of food, medicine, and technology. They came not as conquerors, but as something the galaxy had never seen. The tributary species of the Dominion watched in amazement. The who had served for 30,000 years. The whose home world had been stripped of resources generations ago. All the species that had bent their knees to the looked up at the human ships and saw something impossible. Hope stood on the surface of Nexus Prime, surrounded by representatives of a dozen species. He carried no weapons. He wore simple clothes. Behind him, human ships distributed supplies freely to anyone who needed them. Why? A elder asked him. Her name was and she had spent her entire life under Dominion rule. Why are you helping us? You defeated you could take everything. You could become the new rulers. Why give instead of take? Thought about the question. He had asked it himself many times during the journey to Nexus Prime. Because we remember what it's like to be where you are, he said finally. Because we spent 22 years being treated as lesser beings. Because power is not the same as wisdom, and conquest is not the same as victory. The ruling caste watched from their crystal towers. They had expected the humans to claim their throne. They had prepared for new masters. What they got instead confused them more than any weapon could have. Supreme Adjudicator Al requested a meeting with the human delegation. He arrived expecting demands, territorial claims, tribute requirements, the usual things that victors wanted from the defeated. Met him in the same chamber where Director had first encountered the Dominion, decades ago. The irony was not lost on either of them. "What do you want?" Al asked. He looked tired, broken. The certainty that had defined his species for 60,000 years had crumbled in a single battle. "Nothing," said. Al blinked. Nothing. No territory, no tribute, no acknowledgement of superiority. We're returning home after this. We're closing our borders. We won't contact you again. The Supreme Adjudicator shook his head slowly. Then why? Why reveal yourselves? Why fight at all if you want nothing from us? Had prepared for this question. He had written his answer and rewritten it 100 times. But when the moment came, he spoke from his heart instead. To show you that you were never the apex predators you believed yourselves to be. To show every species you've subjugated that the Dominion can be, and to deliver a warning. A warning. Yes, stepped closer to the alien leader. We came to you in peace 22 years ago. We showed you our best selves. You answered with contempt and cruelty. You forced us to remember what we buried. You forced us to become something we never wanted to be again. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We're going home now. We're going to seal our borders and try to forget again. We're going to teach our children to be kind and hope that kindness is enough. But we will be watching. And if any species anywhere calls for help, if anyone faces what we faced, we will answer. Al's eyes dimmed. And if we refuse to change, if the Dominion continues as before, then we will return, and we will not show the restraint we showed in your solar system. His voice was soft, but there was something in it that made even the Supreme Adjudicator look away. You've seen what we can do when we try not to kill. You have no idea what we can do when we stop trying. The meeting ended without ceremony. There were no treaties signed, no formal agreements, just an understanding between two species about what the future would hold. 3 days later, the human fleet prepared to leave Nexus Prime. Before they departed, they broadcast a message on all frequencies. Every ship, every station, every world in the Dominion heard it. The species that had lived under rule for thousands of years listened and began to understand that the galaxy had changed. Director's voice filled the airwaves. She was too weak now to stand, speaking from a bed on the command ship, but her words carried the weight of a species that had finally shown its true face. We sought peace. For 3 centuries, we buried the darkest parts of ourselves and reached for something better. We came to you with open hands. You answered with cruelty. Her voice grew stronger. So now you know what we concealed. Now you know what we're capable of. We're going home. We're sealing our borders. We will not contact you again. She paused. But know this, if any species anywhere calls for help, if anyone faces what we faced, we will answer. And we will not show the restraint we showed today. We don't want to be the monsters the galaxy needs, but if you force us to be. The final words echoed across 1,000 worlds. We've had 300 years of practice being good. We've had 3 million years of practice being dangerous. Pray you never learn the difference. The human fleet vanished into faster-than-light travel. The last transmission from Earth faded into silence. 50 years passed. The Dominion collapsed slowly, broken not by weapons, but by the knowledge that they had never been as powerful as they believed. The tributary species found their freedom. New alliances formed. The galaxy changed. Doctor was 95 years old when the distress signal came. A small species called the On the Edge of Known Space was being invaded by remnants of the old Dominion. They had sent a message, not knowing if anyone would hear. Please help us. We are peaceful, we have no weapons, we do not know what to do. Sat in his home on Earth and watched the message play on his screen. He thought about his sister, dead so many years ago. He thought about the children who had been taught to hate their own nature. He thought about the long journey from fear to power to something like wisdom. Then he made a call. Within an hour, a single human ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel above the home world. Just one ship. That was all it took. The invaders fled before a shot was fired. Smiled as he watched the news reports. They were safe. The predators had been driven away. Humanity had answered the call just as they had promised. We tried so hard to be peaceful, he said softly to the empty room. Turns out the universe needed us to be something else. His granddaughter, visiting for dinner, looked up from her tablet. What did you say, grandfather? Shook his head. Nothing important, just thinking about the past. But that night, before he slept, he looked up at the stars and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Pride, not in humanity's weapons, not in their victories, but in the choice they had made over and over again to be better than they had to be, to protect instead of conquer, to heal instead of destroy, to remember what they were capable of and choose to be something else. That thought was the real last transmission from Earth, not a warning of destruction. A promise of protection. The stars glittered in the darkness. Somewhere out there, species who had never heard of humanity slept peacefully, unaware that guardians watched over them. And humanity, the predators who learned patience, kept their ancient promise. They waited, they watched, they hoped they would never have to fight again. But if the call came, they would answer. They always would.